It seems there's been no question, but I'll just wait. Okay, so let us begin. Let's go to today's focus, which is on attention for attention. I'll be showing you 2 videos, and then from there I would like to see or hear your response as per usual. And after that, one of the things that I'll be going through with you today is also to work with you how I usually unpack things. Yeah. So if you've been following me, you will notice that one of my habit is always to unpack things, to understand it better. So like studying, what is it? You know, what is it studying? Yeah. So when attention, when we talk about attention, what is it really? Okay, what is it really that we are looking at in terms of attention? So one of the things that I'll be doing with all of you today is to follow me in this journey of how we can unpack attention. Yeah, but before that, let's look at this video.
Paying close attention to something, not that easy, is it? It's because our attention is pulled in so many different directions at a time, and it's in fact pretty impressive if you can stay focused. Many people think that attention is all about what we are focusing on, but it's also about what information our brain is trying to filter them out. There are 2 ways you direct your attention. First, there's overt attention. In overt attention, you move your eyes towards something in order to pay attention to it. Then there's covert attention. In covert attention, you pay attention to something, but without moving your eyes. Think of driving for a second. Your overt attention, your direction of the eyes are in front, but that's your covert attention, which is constantly scanning the surrounding area where you don't actually look at them. I'm a computational neuroscientist, and I work on cognitive brain-machine interfaces, or bringing together the brain and the computer. I love brain patterns. Brain patterns are important for us because based on them, we can build models for the computers. And based on these models, computers can recognize how well our brain functions. And if it doesn't function well, then these computers themselves can be used as assistive devices for therapies. But that also means something, because choosing the wrong patterns will give us the wrong models and therefore the wrong therapies, right? In case of attention, the fact that we can shift our attention not only by our eyes, but also by thinking, that makes covert attention an interesting model for computers. So I wanted to know, what is the brainwave patterns make you look overtly or when you look covertly? I set up an experiment for that. In this experiment, there are 2 flickering squares. One of them flickers in slower rate than the other one. Depending on which of these flickers you're paying attention to, certain parts of your brain will start resonating in the same rate as that flickering rate. So by analyzing your brain signals, we can track where exactly you're watching or you're paying attention to. So to see what happens in your brain when you pay overt attention, I asked people to look directly in one of the squares and pay attention to it. In this case, not surprisingly, we saw that these flickering squares appeared in their brain signals, which was coming from their back of their head, which is responsible for the processing of your visual information. But what I was really interested to see what happens in your brain when you pay covert attention. So this time I asked people to look in the middle of the screen and without moving their eyes, to pay attention to either of these squares. When we did that, we saw that both of these flickering rates appeared in their brain signals. But interestingly, only one of them, which was paid attention to, had stronger signals. So there was something in the brain which was handling these information. So that thing in the brain was basically the activation of the frontal area. The front part of your brain is responsible for higher cognitive functions as a human. The frontal part, it seems that it works as a filter, trying to let information coming only from the right flicker that you're paying attention to, and trying to inhibit the information coming from the ignored one. The filtering ability of the brain is indeed a key for attention, which is missing in some people, for example, in people with ADHDs. So a person with ADHD cannot inhibit these distractors, and that's why they can't focus for a long time on a single task. But what if this person could play a specific computer game with his brain connected to the computer and then train his own brain to inhibit these distractors? Well, ADHD is just one example. We can use this cognitive brain-machine interfaces for many other cognitive fields. It was just a few years ago that my grandfather had a stroke and he lost complete ability to speak. He could understand everybody, but there was no way to respond, even not writing, because he was illiterate. So he passed away in silence. I remember thinking at that time, what if we could have a computer which could speak for him? Now, after years that I'm in this field, I can see that this might be possible. Imagine if we can find brainwave patterns when people think about images or even letters. Like letter A generates a different brainwave pattern than letter B and so on. Could a computer one day communicate for people who can't speak? What if a computer can help us understand the thoughts of a person in a coma? Well, we are not there yet, but pay close attention. We will be there soon. Thank you.
Okay, I'll give 1 minute for us to digest before I show the next video. So think some thoughts about it. You can quickly write it down and post it here or somewhere before I do the next video. You can also type in chat and I can paste the comments for you. Think about the video. Let's look at Susan Greenfield's video.
What makes you different from a goldfish? Let's be brutal, the goldfish doesn't have a great personality, does it? It doesn't have a great character. And I've said many times, if your kids had a goldfish and it died, you could go while they were at school and buy another goldfish and they'd come home and wouldn't know any difference. Whereas you couldn't do that with cats or dogs, and you certainly couldn't do it, even though they might wish you to, with their brothers or sisters. And that's because as we evolve, as we become more sophisticated, it's not to say that genes aren't important, of course they are, but they're much more important for the goldfish, because that's why they have a limited repertoire. They have the tyranny of a very fixed stereotype repertoire of behavior, unlike us, who of course have much greater latitude for all the opportunities and behaviors that we have. So it's this that differentiates us, this ability to interact with the environment and have individual experiences. And guess what? If you have individual experiences, you're going to become, unlike the goldfish, an individual. And this is why we occupy more ecological niches than any other species on the planet. We don't run particularly fast, we don't see particularly well, we're not particularly strong compared to many animals, but gosh, what we are superlative at is learning at adapting. So my first message to you is your experiences are going to determine very much your view of the world, if you like, your mind. How does this happen? Well, when you're born pretty much with all the brain cells that you need at the time, but it is the growth of the connections between the brain cells that accounts for the growth of the brain after birth. And it's astonishing, even in the first 2 years of life, you can see this changing of connections. And now why that's exciting is these connections will be unique to you, even compared to your twin. They will have a unique configuration that's endlessly changing as you have your unique experiences. And this is something called plasticity. It doesn't mean to say the brain is plastic, of course. It comes from the original meaning of the word plastikos, to be molded. Let me give you two very brief examples of the astonishing plasticity of your brain, which accounts for why you are so individual. One is very famous, of London taxi drivers. You may have heard of this. Certainly the London taxi drivers have heard of this study. And it involves the fact that, as you know, they have to learn all the streets of London, and they have to be able to recite to an examiner in an oral exam without recourse to a manual, all the one-way streets of London, how you'd get from A to B, respecting all those prohibitions. Now, to do that, they have a huge burden on what's called their working memory. And interestingly enough, in brain scans, one of the areas in the brain related to memory, it's an area called the hippocampus, is astonishingly in scans larger in London taxi drivers than in people of the same age. And it's not that having a big hippocampus predisposes you to being a London taxi driver, because, well, you have to think of these things, because the difference is more marked for the longer they've been driving. Now, perhaps not many people here are planning any day soon to become London taxi drivers, but perhaps many of you play the piano or have kids that play the piano. And this is an even more exciting experiment that I would like to challenge a philosopher with. It involves 3 groups of adult human volunteers. None at the beginning of the experiment had experience of playing the piano. And the first group, if you get a chance to volunteer for an experiment like this, try and not be in the control group, because they just stared at piano for 5 days. And so, as always, the poor old controls miss out. So anyway, so they were staring at piano. Then there was a second group who learned 5-finger piano exercises. And even in 5 days, forget about 2 years of training to be a cabbie, even within 5 days, you could see an astonishing change in the brain territory relating to the digits as the people were learning this specific activities, they were rehearsing it. But the most exciting group that I would love to talk to philosophers about is the third group merely were asked to imagine they were playing the piano. And their brain scans were pretty much the same as those that had physically learned these new exercises. So I think there's lots of things that we can talk about on that, not that we have time. I'm just going to summarize. The first is you can't really distinguish between mental and physical, as though feelings and thoughts were in some kind of ether out there. And people like me deal with the squalor of the chemistry of the brain, and the two are completely unrelated. Obviously, that's not the case. The other important thing was that as far as the brain was concerned, the exciting and interesting part was not so much the contraction of the muscle, it was the thought that had preceded it. The mind is the personalization of the brain through the dynamic configurations of connections, triggered in turn by your unique experiences. And it starts off as a one-way street, how sweet, how fast, how cold, how bright. But slowly as those connections form, it turns into a two-way dialogue. Every experience you are having will upgrade and update your connections, and every experience you're having will be judged and evaluated through the existing connections. So you're in this lovely dialogue with the outside world. And this gives you a narrative. It gives you a life story. Again, this linearity of a beginning, a middle, and hopefully in the dim future, the final end. Yeah? And everyone has their unique trajectory. And it's this that gives you the identity, I think, that we all so treasure, that makes you so special. And it's all due to the connections in your brain.
Okay, so let us take into a deep dive. What are your thoughts or concerns about tension, based either on the one or two of the videos or both, or from your own experience as parents raising kids? So that's 8 minutes for you to think through this. Okay, put some cosmic vibes. Go ahead, think of your comments, questions, thought process. Put it in chat if you can. Share your thoughts of watching the 2 videos. Do you get anything from the first video? You can type in chat, and I can paste it into for you. Okay. Thank you for your responses. Let us take a look closely. Possible to map the brain using brainwaves in the future. Yes, since if you read Dr. Aman's Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, one of the early doctors who uses brain scans to understand mental health and mental conditions. Yes, the mapping of the brain is an interesting area that's been explored further by neuroscience, right? And the more exploration done, the more the much more recent finding find that it is like a universe in itself. You know how the brain works. So this is something there. Over attention may make you too focused on a specific region, overlook other areas. So this is more on the specific type of attention. Every experience will upgrade the connections in the brain and creates a unique worldview, thereby makes learning positive. And I think this is quite strongly in social work, where we look at the person in environment perspective. And what Baroness, she's a Baroness, what Baroness Susan Greenfield shared in her talk was, is the evidence of how your environment can affect your thinking. So this again goes to what we shared in the timeliness about what you can do as parents, the place of learning or studying very important, how you can impact your and understanding a bit about attention today possibly is how you can design the place where your child is such that they can focus a bit more. Okay, so for example, I don't know, for me when I was growing up, I tend to need a distraction in order to focus my attention. I do not know why, right? I need a distraction. So like now when I'm talking to you, I have my computer game here on my left side. Okay, it's on. Right, so when you're doing something, I will distract myself and play, and then I can come back and focus. right? Or sometimes I do that. I study in the canteen as an indicator that once I can no longer hear the sound from my environment, I know I know that I am in full attention, right? I'm in full attention. But then again, there is that concern, right? They pay attention to the weirdest things. Now you can be surprised how it can benefit child later on. Yeah? So, and in watching him, we realize he's learning through all his senses. So I think this one ties up to the type of overt or covert attention. Realize that I filter out certain things unknowingly. So again, about the function of how the brain works. So some things related to here. Covert attention, again, weirdest thing. Okay, about this again, about the mechanism, plasticity of mind change. And this is quite important to take note that to believe that whatever condition our child is in, it can change with effort and with certain setting because the brain is plastic. So this is why I wanted to share a bit about that. Yeah. Okay, why focus on other dot what's happening. So this is again the mechanism of it. Making meaning of the experiences that my child went through is different from my own, yes. And because it's different from our own experiences, their brain are wired a bit differently. What will give attention to is prioritized. Here is on the mechanism. Possible to map the brain. Okay, somewhere here. Frontal lobe related to here. Okay, so it's here. So first video explained again about covert and overt attention. Then covert attention allows one to capture all around spatial information. So okay, here. Okay. So this is our exploration. So we got something here on covert. And then let's do the unpacking. Let's start to unpack. Right. Okay. So we know that what do we know? We know that there's a type, right? We know that there's a overt. We know that one of the things that it is based on a visual cue. And this is the bias, huh? It's a bias. When we talk about attention, we talk about visual cue. Can I have a show of hands? How many of you get very agitated when your child don't look at you when you're talking to them? How many of you get agitated when your child don't look at you when you're talking to them? Okay. Any more? All of you okay? Yeah. Because for us, a lot of time, the bias is to the idea of a visual cue, because we understand that when we focus, it's based on the visual one. And we know from today's one that, you know, even the visual one, there is the overt attention and there is the covert visual attention, right? So one that is based on whether you're looking at the dot, and two, you know, when you are not looking at the dot, but you can pay attention to what is happening, right? Yeah. And that's our bias. So I hope that from today, when you start to know something about covert attention, right, you will know, you could accept that they may not be looking at you, they may not appear to pay attention to you, but they could be paying attention. They could be doing something else, but their mind is still listening to what you do. And teenagers tend to behave like this, but teenagers tend to voice out a lot. They say, dengar lah, you know, I'm hearing you, by doing something else, looking at the phone or doing something else, but they are looking at that. And part of the attention, of course, when we go in the other end, is the distraction. Okay. Things that take away from our tender attention becomes the distraction. The things that we want to see becomes our visual, and then our overt and covert attention. And this is very useful when if you are a facilitator, you need to, as a parent, you know, you want to appear not to be too controlling. You need to build your ability in your covert attention. Okay, just not about your child, about you. Like for example, I could be watching TV, my kids sitting down there studying, but my attention is on their studying, not on the TV. Yeah, but in the end also I got found out, right, by my kids, right? They tend to find out a lot. So over time it doesn't work, but initially it does work. So I'll be looking at it. Even if you go to the workshop, you know, people picking up paper, listening to paper. So when we do our study skills workshop and our study skills session, it is not just about, you know, looking at the giving attention, but working on that over attention. And because of that, it'd be also good to allow your child to develop their capacity. Now that we know there's such a thing as overt and covert attention, right? And especially for children who do not have the filter to just focus on one thing. They can focus on so many things, right? So these are something that sometimes, you know, when I make the recall exercise, I just tell them, just write what you want, because I know some kids are like that. They just, things come into their head, they pay attention to the widespread of things. So what we can do when they write down is that we can slowly, you know, tell them, okay, this one, you expand this side a bit, and later on you expand this side a bit. But at the start, to just let them come out. Because if you're going to focus that you want them to think in their mind that I want you to focus on this topic. Some cannot do that, right? But when we start to keep doing the recall exercises to say, okay, now you put it all out, okay, never mind. Now we just focus on this. Hopefully over time, they establish the brain schema that now the question is now on energy. I should just focus on energy. I can stop because they have done the exercise physically, the absolute experiential exercise. Remember, experience do influence how your brain works, right? Right? So just a lot of the thing, you know, just that's the reason why, you know, I moved away from, if you notice a lot of my study skills, there is no memorization. There is no cue cards used. Because cue cards you just see and then you just say. So you need to draw a lot on your brain without taking advantage of the physical memory that you get from writing things down. And recently, and that comes in the articulation skills. Hence, you see very heavy in terms of the study techniques I designed, that students have just to write down and write down and write down. Even if it's wrong at the first time, it's okay, but later on they can correct it. Because writing down, they can see, they can offload, and you can also see, and you can provide the guidance. Okay, now you look at this, and now you look at that. Right? So the first thing we need to be aware of is that not every child has the ability to do. And if they get distracted, we should now understand that this is how their brain works. Right? And there's so many concepts when it comes to attention. I have these two very heavy papers for those of you who want to go into the attention. This one is a quite comprehensive. Yeah, the messy reality. I just took out one page here. You can see just the concepts related to attention alone. There are so many. Alerting, binding, covert attention, disengaged attention, endogenous influences, engaged attention, executive control, exogenous influences, inhibition of return. This inhibition of return is whether or not we have the ability to come back to focus on here. Like what you did just now. I show you two videos that are not really related. But then the question asked to focus on the first video about attention. How many of you were able to do that very quickly? How many will make sense? Then suddenly you can go back to that first video. All right. So us understanding our own brain function will also help us understand our child's brain function, and hopefully that is the things. And at times we do not know what is the fantastic thing that our child captures, right? Like Fauzi sharing about you know, his son, well, class not listening, but then later pick up something else. Yeah. So let it be, because when they are young, especially, they're trying to make sense, you know, and it's very scary that they have all these thoughts keep popping up. All these thoughts keep popping up. And when we reaffirm that that is not something correct, or it's not something that they should be thinking of, then they'll be wondering, what am I lacking? Yeah, but if we look at it the other way, that is a gift, because like I said, if you are a facilitator, yeah, you will need to really, heighten your covert attention. I run the problem-based learning class in the public poly for 10 years, and each class have to pay attention to every single 25 students. I have to listen in to 5 different conversations by 5 groups, so that I can give them a fair grade at the end of the day. So I struggle with it, but I'm sure someone who has that strength in covert attention, who can pick up so many things, would be an advantage, right? All they have to do is to be trained since young. How do you take advantage of that? That paying attention to the full world and then write it down and then organize it in writing. It's easier that way rather than everything is held up in the head, right? So not agitated. Okay, well, that affect how they handle things too. Yeah, and see this question. I just bring out this question. Will that affect how they handle things too? Because I have strong ADHD trait and it's also showing in my first curve. Yeah, because our actions are driven by our thought process, our values and beliefs, right? And as they're growing up, they're trying to make sense. I have this thought that pushes me to act in a certain way. But in my past early years, when I do it this way, I get scolded, I get reprimanded. So should I do it again or not? All right. And that's why you see when they're asked to recall, especially those who attended the workshop, asked to recall, some of them hold back. Some of them hold back because they don't know where is the boundaries. And sometimes they cannot control the boundaries into where. So it's always good, to let free, find out what is the baseline and the default setting, and then slowly guide where their thoughts should be, right? And writing it down, again, emphasize and going through, okay, this one you get, okay, this one just put aside for a while. That experience itself hopefully will help the brain to shape that, okay, when you focus on all this, let's say you look in front of you, suddenly you see 10 items, while those who can focus can only look at 2 items, 3 items, but you see 10 items. Now you put these 10 items right on a piece of paper and then sort out which of the 10 items, the 2 or 3 that you want to look at. Okay? And this got me thinking about some of the students that I work with. When I have a kind of cue that they have this struggle with attention, do you know how challenging looking at our textbook is? It's not like this, just words and then they can follow and read linearly, So you have words here, you have pictures here, you have boxes there, right? It looks interesting to some students, but for students who are picking up everything at one go, they look at the page, they see, where do I start? Right? So one of the advanced technique I have for called under clarifying understanding over here is this thing. I will always use the technique, the instrument of isolating. I let them carry cards like this. But usually it's preferred black, cards, colored cards. Where then they read, they have to cover certain areas that they do not want to be distracted with. So every student who I encounter have this struggle where they look, especially secondary school textbook, you open up one page, you will see so many things calling out for your attention, right? So many bold words, so many diagrams. Sometimes the whole diagram over 2 pages. The textbook say ambil kau, then they cannot know where to start, where to pay attention. So that is where they struggle. So if they have something like a card to cover, they physically put a thing a cover and they focus and they read. And then slowly they can remove that card and start to see the punya focus. So this is one. This is why I just put here indicator that we have talked about this. So that is some of the advanced instruments we do. We don't, unlike the 22 essential study skills, where through our workshop and through our session, we will just let we will just teach child each and every one of them. But when it comes to our advanced instrument or clarifying understanding, we look at what are the students' needs. So for when we talk about attention today is to isolate. Okay? To isolate. So you see this big area, instead of looking at this big area, we isolate. But some students, they focus too much. Their attention, their filter is very strong. So when they grow into a higher level where they need to look at many things, especially when you do humanities, you got to look at all the factors, they struggle. So they are the opposite, in which we need to extend their scope. So when they look here, they cannot understand. So we need to extend the scope so that they understand this small thing. Yeah, so that is the extending. Yeah, so isolating or extending that we need to where we can use with kids who have one too strong a focus, right? Another one they have struggled with focusing on one items. Yeah. So here go. Just put this here. Right. What else when we do unpack attention, what else can we say about attention? When we want our kids to pay attention to us, what do we actually mean? Can somebody share? One, we know the visual cue, we want them to look at us, right? What else? Yeah, that they must respond. Okay, one is they must respond. So one, they look at us. Two, they must respond. Any more? Okay, they must listen. And I think it's not so much the listen, is that we want them to respond the feedback lah. Because if they don't feedback, that means they're not listening, right? So something to do with the feedback. So something must the response. So we always tell them, right? Dengar tak? You know? Can you repeat to me? Repeat to me what I say. Right? So that is always what you say, because you need the feedback. Then when they're young, they're okay, they're sad. Then when they become teenager, they will respond back. Dengar, I hear you. Right? Because they are tired of it. So look us, we respond, we need to feedback. Why? Because we need to know what goes on into their heads. What else? What else? When we want to say they pay attention, what do we mean actually? Any thoughts? So this unpacking, so we know. Look at us. So look at us is something related to the visual. Okay, so this one I move here. So when they must respond, that means they must have we expect something. Like if they want to respond, that means we expect some process to happen in their head, right? That means they need to process our instruction. Okay, so they need to process our instruction. So we want that. Another feedback here. Okay. So what else do we expect? Any more? When we unpack, so when there's distraction here. But we know when it comes to distraction, it's not actually a thing, it's just that they are paying attention to so many things. So what is it actually? Is the absence of a filter. Right? So what can we do? For example, if you're a child who is easily distracted, able to ask questions in the topic. Okay, so what that's part of feedback. Okay, ask questions. Okay, asking question is another set of skills. Okay. Asking question. So this one is another set of, processing here. Okay. relevant result as it gets done. So process instruction and following here action. So we need to observe actual behavior. Then concentration, right? Concentration. Where do you put concentration? I think probably when they process. So maybe it's from here we pull out into one concentration. Any more? Now that you map it out like this, you want the feedback, you want to ask question, and you want to see the action, right? I will just highlight this thing that we want them to be happening. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 processes. Right? But you only say one thing. You say one thing, you expect for 4 processes to take place. And how long normally you give them? Right? So you remember when you do a timeliness, before action, they need to prep, right? They need to think what is it that you are trying to want them to do. So if you're not clear with the instruction, you want me to respond, you want me to ask question, you want me to do what? Give me a clue. You know when does this thought process happen? When you tell them one thing, they just look at you. Okay, so take note of this, and then when they do, sometimes they do the wrong thing, but they're trying their best. They're doing the wrong thing, yeah, but they're trying their best. They are taking the action because they have 4 processes. Feedback, ask question, process instruction, feedback, ask question, action. So the prep. Okay, prep. Yeah, robot pun. Okay. So yeah, and remembering. Right. So now we add one more thing. Under process, they must think back. What was the last time that my mom, asked me to do? What is the correct one? So they must recall. Recall for what? Recall for precedence. Why is it so small? Okay. You're checking the precedence. Last time, what did I do that I didn't get scolding? So you see? So this is why I like to unpack and then we map it out. Then we can see. Right? And can you imagine this happening when they just wake up in the morning and they just come back from school? Okay, and that's why it's useful that we understand the barriers of communication, right? There are 4 barriers of communication. We need to understand that. So when I start to teach effective comms at Republic Poly, I also learn, I apply it in my family, and then it kind of improve. The first one is the physical. Okay, physical barriers. These are things like because listening also attention, right? They're not looking at you. So my wife, my family always tell me, Abba, you always talk the other side, we are behind you. So the sound wave is that side, we are behind you. So there's a physical barrier. They can't hear. Right. So the first one is the physical. They always remind me that. Okay. Or sometimes they put on their earpiece, so that's a physical barrier, right? That's one. Second barrier is a psychological. And psychological one is something that always happen when they hit teenager. Ini mesti nak kena marah punya. Ya, ini mesti nak kena marah. Right? Yeah, then the language barrier, we call it the semantic barrier. Right? Lingo ke apa, they don't understand what you're talking about. Like my daughter say, she always have to check dictionary every time I scold her. So, you know, don't understand. So there's a barrier. Yeah, how to avoid kena marah. No, so now you see, because of precedence, they think, yeah, thank you. Yeah. They think only one. Avoid. And avoidance is part of anxiety. Anxiety, fight, flight, you know, freeze and fawn. Fawn is they try to please you. So that's where you see when the oldest child is always fighting, then the second child is always fawning. Because they don't want to fight, so they want your attention. They want to please you, so they fawning. So again, avoidance. So remember, so in the teenage mind, this is all that's happening. Okay. Last one is physiological. When they are tired, when your body is tired. Okay. So this one is semantic or barriers. So sometimes when I bring this up, because sometimes when our frustration comes when we feel that they're not paying attention to what we are saying. And when we think about that, then we have to think, is there a communication barrier? Is there a barrier to communication that we need to think about? So for example, did we scold them when they're tired? That's why nothing goes in, right? Or there's a physical thing where they can't hear, you know? For example, recently I realized I stopped taking coffee because the coffee tend to let my, I don't know how to pronounce it, use something canal that affects the ear to inflame. Yeah, so I can't hear properly. So that's a physiological barrier, right? To hear. So these are things that probably we may want to do. Okay, IQ, all this quotient is part of processing. And yeah, it is psychological. It can be depending on what is your concern with the IQ, because the IQ test, if you notice, and I try to take those IQ tests, and they seem to test patterns a lot. Right? If this, and then what is the next one? Then the other one is also IQ in terms of, you know, the ability to speak and use a wide range of vocabulary, is to know the different nuances. So that also falls again, if the IQ is the one that is affecting the vocab, then it could be a language or semantic noise. Right? If how they process what you're saying, then it's psychological. Right? But sometimes people appear slow because of this. There are so many things to process. And probably because they grew up in an environment where they are not given the opportunity to learn how to process them, they take a long time. So that's where they will look at you and then they will just stare. But in the back of their mind, they could be, you know, working, trying to process. Right? And especially when their mind works very fast, that is the other thing. They're actually not slow. Their mind works so fast that their mind presents so many trajectories of what could possibly happen. And that triggered an anxiety for which they freeze. You imagine someone like Dr. Strange go in the past, how many million times he go and try to do the scenario. And some kids are like that. They project so many possible trajectories that they look lost. Because their anxiety is activated to safeguard themselves, they freeze. So that's why you scold them, so they just look at you. But they're still processing. Yeah. So that's where it struggles. So imagine this is already for a child who has attention control. So now if you remove the one that have the filter, can you now imagine the brain process that is taking place? Right? And and they have so much energy. Today I was at Telok Kurau Primary. With a group of students. And I give them the recall exercise just to see how they behave in terms of recollection, right? So issues of needing a distraction. Yeah, probably, their mind is too, or I start to observe where I know they can expand the recall map, but they just wouldn't want. Because it's our first time, so they're also assessing how I'm behaving with response to their behavior. So that to see whether they will want to open up to me, whether they want to invest that relationship with me. So you're talking about 11-year-old, 12-year-old who would have a range of experiences with different older people. So they're sensing, they're testing boundaries, they're testing borders, and so forth, right? I could see some fawning, some avoiding, right? And some fighting. Everything you say, they say back something. Right? So when you start to know this, then it's easy for you to know how to handle. So when my daughter suddenly get agitated, okay, I say, okay, this is a fight response. And why is that so? So we take a step back, right? But sometimes I also have my fight response. So that's why so what I've been trying to do is always to train my brain to do instantaneous activation of a stop measure. Okay. How I do that is every time I get angry, I will straight away pull myself back. Hold back and then think back. Then the next time, hopefully, over time, you create this auto response. Before you want to get angry, something pull you back, and then you go back into that state. But it comes with a very conscious reflection after every action that you regret or you feel that you shouldn't have done. Okay, so that one can come for another session. So that is all. I hope. Are you all following? Because I don't see your face. I only see Azina and Shah. So I don't have a verbal cue. It's like as though you're not giving me your attention, right? So I don't know. I don't have feedback. Right? Right. Yeah. Some of you ask questions, some of you don't. So I don't know. So you see, I struggle. Yeah, still listening, yes. Right? Because there's no response. So I don't know whether you're paying attention, you're following, right? Yeah, and we adults do that. This example alone, you will not do that. If I don't prompt for a response, only keep quiet, I also be wondering. Are you all, paying attention to me or doing something else? Yeah. So but of course, at the back of my mind, I know this is recorded, so you can always come back and take a look at it again. But I hope that now you can understand a few things. Yes, I'm playing game at the side. Yeah, if you want to see, yeah. I can't turn my computer anymore. Last time I used to have a freestanding camera, so I can move it around. Now I'm just using my laptop camera. Okay, yeah. So be mindful and that's the reason why part of this is that when trying to mold timeliness, I have a clock in every room. Because it influences. It shapes the brain. It shapes the experience, shapes how the child now think about time. So just time check alone is not helpful unless you have clock in every room, so they can actually check. Time check. Okay. So a lot. Look at now what you can do is look at your child's study environment in the house. Go and see. Ask them. I mean, for those who can speak, you ask them. Is the place conducive for you? Can you sit down here and concentrate? What else can I do for you? Right? Oh, okay, managing your spouse. Yeah, multitasking, yes. Right? So multitasking, some of us need that, like me. Every time I do a Zoom, I have 3 terminals on. So this is 1, this is 2 for my music station, like a DJ. And then this is, I think, right? Okay, that's it for today. Any last question? That's it for today. Any last question? 5 minutes. Think through what we have gone through.
Brother Surya, sorry,
Yeah.
can you repeat again on the isolation part just now?
Okay, hold on. Let me just stop it. Okay. Isolation. Yeah, okay, Alexa. Yeah, try to make them do the announcement. Yeah, that's what my kids. Now my kids well, that's why it's called time check. I got time check, then they will shout out to me. 11:50. Okay, good. All right, so I will just repeat. Isolating is basically just to help in the focus. So what I would normally do is, for example, I try to find. Okay, let's say this picture, right? There's so many things to pay attention to, right? When you look at this picture, you do not know where to start. Unless you attend my talk, you know where to start. If you don't attend my talk, is it here, left side down, or is it right side down? You know, where do we start? So when we do an isolating technique, normally I give them a cut like this, a cut like that, and then they decide where they want to pay attention to. Let me just go up here. So let's imagine this is a cut. Normally I give them a black card. Okay, so let's say they want to read here, right? I will cover like this lah. Isolating. Can give them a bigger card also. So they want to see here, they so now they don't look at here anymore. They know they need to focus kat sini. Then when they're done, they just focus on it, they read. Yeah, the reason why I always use a black card because it's non-color. It not supposed to catch your attention, and you can able to cover and you can see. That is one approach of isolating. Okay, or they can fold. I mean, we don't want them to fold the paper, then the textbook becomes very messy. So we give them a card. Another way is that when students read a text and very heavy with new terms, I will ask them to cut out the post-it, very, very small stickers, and then they cover the words that they don't understand. Let's say I don't understand the word appreciating. So anything like that, I will just put here, and I replace this with A. I replace it with A. And I paste it. Yeah. Okay. I replace it. Then they will just read A first, one round, and then later they tell their mind A is appreciating. And now they read. Usually students can understand. We work with students quite a bit to do that. I use this method actually when I took my elective module in 1996. First time NUS introduced a cross-faculty module where they want to see how students handle cross-faculty. So I was in the arts, so we were encouraged to take modules from engineering and science. So I took the one on insects and diseases by the zoology department, and there I go. I went in so many scientific terms and scientific names. I get confused. So I use this technique. I cover all the words that I don't understand. I read the whole thing. So I give me a big picture, right, to extend my thought, and then I focus into one by one. So if we follow Barbara Oakley that talks about focused thinking and then diffuse thinking, this is how you can play around it. Yeah. So for example, students who cannot pay focus, they are very strong in diffuse thinking. So what you need to do is to let them practice focused thinking. And students who can focus, if focused thinking is good, but they need diffuse thinking in order to understand things better. You want to know whether they are very strong focused thinker is that when you teach them one method and then give them a problem sum, if that method is not relevant, they cannot think of any other things. One only, unless you teach them another method. So they can't think of how to find other ways to resolve it. Okay, so there's a focused thinker. Do you understand? Does it explain?
Yeah, Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, brother. Very clear.
Okay. Any more questions? Last 3 minutes. So give them an isolation card. Sometimes that's why I have stack of this at my house. Either this plus black color or even plain white colors. Depend on which is a less distracting color for them. Any question? Any more? Okay, the idea of using the card is not new. I was influenced by, you know, the horses. They have the blinkers, right? Yeah. So it was the same thing. The horses have blinkers because so that they don't get distracted and they focus on their pathway for the race. Okay. No further question. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend. See you. Any question you can just post in the group for further discussion.